So we are here today basically with something called Shaping Davos. There is a subcontext called Talking Davos. Now Shaping Davos is being actually organized for the very first time by the Global Shapers community. We are, as you know, Global Shapers is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. So the World Economic Forum has their flagship event in Davos, which is currently actually going on. So, you know, the who's who from the political world, from the business world, you know, they're all there in Davos right now. Be it Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Tony Blair, Mohamed Yunus, you know, they're all there in Davos right now. So what the forum actually thought was, why not give the youth a voice to actually connect? You know, all of us cannot go to Davos. It's an expensive event. Davos is blocked as it is. Francs went up by 20%. So, you know, they thought, why not give the people, the various hubs all across the world, a chance to actually talk to the leadership in Davos. So for that purpose, actually 40 hubs from the 400 were selected. So on a daily basis for the next 4 days, it started from Monday, and we've actually been, you know, the voice of the youth is being taken to Davos. So today's topic is actually being moderated by Mr. Jyoti Kamal from CNN IBM. So he's going to be our moderator, and he's going to be the voice in Davos in the evening. So we have a great stellar panel on the other side also. You know, we have Mr. Nick Going from BBC. So he's actually going to be picking up your tweets, all the questions that he finds relevant. He will actually then post them back. We have the global MD from McKinsey. We have Mr. Maulik Putanda, who is the richest man in Africa and the most powerful one as well. So we have a great audience and we have a great panel lined up. I'll let Mr. Jyoti Kamal introduce the panel to you. And before he starts, just briefly, I just wanted to speak about our project. We actually, the Global Shapers community has a competition which CORE organizes. There is a grant for $50,000, and I'm very proud to say that the Chandigarh hub in the very first year actually won the grant for $50,000. We actually won the grant. It's now officially being declared in Davos in the next couple of days. So I just wanted to show a couple of screenshots, you know, from where we started and where we ended up. So this was actually the competition, you know, round one, where we put across our project, which is Kalpavriksha. The project is all about, you know, Kalpavriksha is the divine tree of giving. So the whole concept was we wanted to build a suite of apps, mobile apps, which facilitate the process of giving and receiving. So blood donation is a prime example, right? We have another couple of apps. The next one is called In Kind, which is actually to facilitate, you know, NGOs, you donate a lot of stuff. Maybe a lot of times the NGOs do not need that. A lot of us, for example, go to an orphanage. We carry chocolates, biscuits, Maggi. But the orphanage really does not need that. They might need oxygen, baby oil, you know, stuff like that. So the whole concept for In Kind is to facilitate that demand supply gap. So we've actually built this whole project which we call Kalpavriksha. We have put it across. In the first round, basically, shapers from all over the world. So that should be around 4,000–5,000 people. They actually shortlist 12 entities to go to round 2. So this is round 2. In round 2, what happens is, again, now not the shapers, but the curators from each hub actually vote for a project, right? And there are 5 prizes for $10,000 each, and there is a grand prize for $50,000 each. For the grand prize, the jury was actually the CEO of Coke, you know, the chairman of World Wildlife Federation, Condoleezza Rice, you know, those kind of people. So they actually pick up the grand prize. So, and this is it, the grand prize. So we were actually featured on the Coca-Cola's website yesterday on the homepage. The screenshot is actually taken yesterday in the morning, and our project was right. This picture is actually various people from Chandigarh. A lot of them might be sitting here as well. So they're all there actually. So the picture was also there. So this is the project that we want to do. Please do download the app once you're done. And please, the hashtag Shaping Davos, we've been really saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manish Johar. Without you, Global Shapers wouldn't have shaped up here in Chandigarh. Who would have thought that this possibility would exist, that you would be able to exchange your ideas from here right on to Davos? Of course, Davos is being very smart in the digital age. You can kind of imagine that. They have figured out the model that they need to increase their footprint. Of course, going beyond the business leaders, the exclusive, they say that about 1,800 executive jets flew into Davos, bringing the who's who of the world there to this little kind of village in Switzerland. And that's the kind of gathering that's there. But now they want to increase their footprint. So they have basically reached out to the world through these 40 hubs. One of the hubs, of course, is Chandigarh. The other hub from India was in Pune. So, of course, we are talking about engaging youth in work. But something that's astounding is that at no point in the history of humankind have so many youth been in a single country as they do today in India. So the largest footprint of youth in the world is today in India. So it's very exciting, it's a challenging time, it's a double-edged sword. If we play the game right, it's going to be absolutely an upward curve for India, but if we play the game wrong, it's going to be trouble, because that many youth not knowing what to do with themselves, the largest young population in the world not knowing what to do with themselves, it's going to be trouble. And that's what we are going to be discussing here. How do we take India forward? How do we engage youth in work? How do we kind of get ideas from you? So how we'll take it is that we will kind of go through the panel. There'll be short interactions. They'll give their kind of views and suggestions on the topics that they're all experts in. We've got a stellar panel here. I'll shortly be introducing them to you. And you can kind of course, go on tweeting your questions, which we'll take up towards the end. And then, of course, there'll be questions that you can ask, suggestions, because what we're going to be doing here is the distilled wisdom that comes out from this particular discussion here is then going to be transmitted on to Davos. And from Davos, it goes on to the business and the political leaders. And there, one hopes that it translates into actionable kind of actions, in fact, on the ground, and translates into reality and actually kind of takes people forward. So I'll just introduce the stellar panel that we have with us. Gursharan Singh, Principal Advisor to Regional Center for Entrepreneurship Development. So entrepreneurship is going to be very important. So we are going to be listening to you in terms of how do you kind of really make that happen, is that happening, the challenges for it. Next to him is Vivek Atre, the Indian Administrative Service, Deputy Commissioner of Panchkula, an expert at putting pen to paper, a keen observer of humankind, and absolutely we are looking forward to views from your side. Next to him is General Mehta from the Indian Army, a very pyramidal structure, sir. And as they say that we make men out of boys and then leaders out of men. So that's also something that we are looking forward to. Yeah. For women also. All right, yes, of course. How could I miss that? yeah, absolutely. In fact, sir, my dad is in the army, and as I was coming here, he was telling me, don't forget the women. They are going to be playing a very important role in the army today. Yeah. And next to him is Samir Goel, Delivery Manager at Infosys. Infosys, of course, brought in this entire revolution in the country, changed the entire perspective of India. So in that sense, we are again kind of going to have some exciting views from him. Next to him is Robin Agarwal, Director of the Millennium School. It's at your end where it all starts, at the school level. Goes on to college, university, and then the whole excitement of youth. So we'll be having his views. And next to him is Mr. Shiv Kumar of the Indian School of Business. He is Director Engagement and Learning here at ISB. So of course ISB again has really set the benchmarks in the region. It has totally changed the perception of what a business school has to be like, is like. So, and that is in fact changing the image of India. So we'll be looking forward to your views also. And sir, I'll be starting with you, Gursharanji. How can entrepreneurship play a pivotal role in closing the youth employment gap? Because right now, there is a gap. They say jobs need people, people need jobs, but somehow the jobs are not finding the right people and the people are not finding the right jobs. Where's the gap and how do you close it?
See, gap has, we have to go to the start of the gap first. If we look at the youth as in today, they are enthusiastic, they are ambitious, but if we go, the problems start from the day they were born and they have been till now. It's related to the conditioning. More often than not, most of the youth is coming from a middle class family background, and families start with the women, as we were just talking about. So they all have, when they started, why they go to the school? They go to the school to get not a entrepreneurship degree, they go there to get a degree, and when they go to the college, they go to get a job. So when that kind of a thing is there, in case we shift the kind of a conditioning of the mind of the people, of the youth, and we shift towards being an owner rather than working for someone, entrepreneurship can fill the gap. But to do that, probably we need to change the mindset of the people, and that what entrepreneurship is and what it is there, and once that happens, which has been the case even in USA when microeconomics went for an upswing, quite a bit of people were involved, and with today's technology, it's much easier to be a micro enterprise person rather than ever. So entrepreneurship in fact is the future of the youth, and they got to be there, but the only thing is they need to be made more aware. Today if you go out, everyone is aware of Flipkart, everyone is aware of the Amazon, but how many people have been made aware of the entrepreneurship? It is not the fact. We need to make that happen probably, and the rest will be all fine.
Vivek Atre, each time round the question keeps getting bounced back to the government. A lot of people say that it's the government that has to do something. It's all the time that the government isn't doing this. Let the nation do something. Let the government do this. Do you really believe that the onus is entirely of the government to kind of get the system going? Where does it really start from? Is it a chicken and egg situation? Because people say if the government doesn't do anything, we can't do anything. But the government says, come on, you must do something. And then we figure out how do we help you. Where does it start? What is the role that the government is going to play in this massive challenge that's up ahead in India?
Yes, Jyoti Kamal, in fact, I can feel a lot of energy in this room, especially with your moderation, being so energetic. What is happening with the government is that the government has to take the lead. And there are two aspects to this problem of the youth not getting employable jobs. What happens is that the youth is studying in a particular manner in a system which is archaic, which needs to be tutored to the times. The end user is either the industry or they have to become entrepreneurs, as he said. So what is required is that tweaking of the system with the times that are changing. Now that tweaking is a process which is slow in the government and in government institutions. So therefore people who are passing out of college are not finished products who are required by the industry. Now this finished product also needs soft skills and finishing. So these soft skills training elements are not incorporated in colleges, in the government especially. In the private sector, they are at times. But there are also teaching shops in the private sector which are not focusing on quality at all. So it is a problem which is far-reaching, which is not only restricted to the government. And the government can take a lead, but the industry and the government have to work together to ensure that what is being churned out of educational institutions, that is the youth, is what is required by the industry. So I'll end here for the moment, come back to it later.
Because even as you say all that, there are a number of questions that really come in terms of how this interchange of ideas really takes place. Where exactly are the bottlenecks? Because it sounds absolutely the thing to be done, but it still doesn't happen. So we'll in fact come back to that why doesn't it happen when it's supposed to happen? At the end of the day, we are one of the largest standing armies in the world, so a sizable population of youth employed in the army. So how is the army itself tackling this entire situation in terms of employing youth, skilling them up, and then releasing them back as skilled manpower into the system?
Just to put across the dimensions of the problem, Jyoti, I'd like to say that we are authorized a total of 69,000 officers and 1.2 million men. That makes us the third largest army in the world and probably the biggest employed in the country. There are certain things that the army itself is doing wrong. We have a deficiency of officers amounting to 13,100 for the last 30 years, and our government's ability to do perception management for people, young people to join the military forces has been so bad that we have not been able to make up this deficiency. Secondly, we have a total of 46,000 male officers and just 2,500 female officers. The problem is that men suffer from the mindset I call the Manu mindset, going back 2,000 years, where women were good for procreation. They were good for activity in terms of child bringing and rearing up, but they weren't good for much else. But that tragic linear mindset is affecting us as a country. Because today we have 50% women and 50% men in a population of 1.2 billion, right? And we are not using this extraordinary resource tool called woman. From whatever age you come across, you find us undermining them, patronizing them, looking down upon them, sidelining them, not putting them into the mainstream. And if you look at a profile of the leading nations of the world, all of them have made women central to development. So one of the biggest things we need to get rid of, and that is at the government level, at the private level, at societal levels, at the male-female level, at the mother's level, who has to bring up the male child to tell him that respect for the girl will start at age 5 and it will begin with you, son, otherwise you get a slap. Stop. If that doesn't happen, a lot of things are going wrong. Minor correction here. Although we are not as smart an army as Israel, which is state of the art, trenches will remain germane to war fighting. Because no matter what you do, you finally have to make sure that you get your job done and if possible, come out alive at the end of the job. However, I get your larger point. The armies are becoming smart. We are also becoming smart. We are facing the same problem he was hinting at. The requirement to upgrade systems that are archaic systems, that go back several decades, and bring them up to shape, finds resistance. And the military is a pretty stubborn animal when it comes to resistance to change. Because change means you have to work very hard and think afresh. And the military is not notorious for thinking afresh. We can reinforce a hell of a lot of things. There's a lot of heroism involved, a lot of bravery, a lot of character, a lot of courage. We have a corporate credo of Naam Namak Nishan, honor, integrity, flag. That's very fine. But when things have to change, you have to be a game changer, you have to be transformational, you have to be inspirational, you have to stand up to be counted. And that category of officer we are not really developing in the army. These officers come, they come as mavericks. And they make an impact and then they go out. But the mainstream army is a conservative army which requires to upgrade in its outlook and in its skills. And when it does that, a whole set of young people, absolutely raring to go, will come up. And will make sure that they value lives much more than we could when we were in uniform.
In fact, I'm reminded of my friend sister. She joined the army about 16, 17 years back. She's a colonel now, but she's about 5 feet in height, so diminutive, absolutely. And when she joined the army, women had really not started joining the army in large numbers then. Though it's still not sizable even now, but still it's substantially more. So when she joined, and she would be kind of confronted by the 6-foot-tall Rajputana rifles guys, and they would be reluctant to lift their hands in salute. After all, she was an officer in the army. But times have changed.
Things have changed.
Now the hands go
Indeed.
automatically in salute now. So it's an acceptance of women in the army. And at the end of the day, half our population is women, so it's going to be a very important kind of role in that sense.
In fact, they are forgetting gender now and calling her Saab, which is how she should be called, because she's an officer and not a male or a female officer. She's just an officer and must be obeyed without question.